Not many managers would go through a run of 6 defeats and a draw in 7 games and not be questioned. So I don't think he is above being questioned.
I think the whole club at the moment is clearly febrile. I think they're really feeling that pressure, and 11 points is a hell of a gap.
Yeah, it's a hell of a gap, and any other manager, any other club, you'd probably write them off right now, but you just wonder whether or not he can pull a rabbit out of the hat.
I think it's the manner of the defeat, the way that Liverpool steamrolled them, particularly in that first half.
There's been a lot of talk of how close it was to perfection. I thought it was a brilliant performance, but the big drawback really in terms of the overall performance was the lack of a clinical edge in attack.
You haven't seen a Guardiola team look so mortal too often over the course of his career, and I don't think it's a give me. They bounce right back against Nottingham Forest.
But the truth is, when you've done so much and you've made such a splash on the landscape, when it starts to go wrong, you're going to get the scrutiny as well. Hey, it's Premier League All Access, and Alex Crook is here, so is Kevin Hatchard. Let's have a look back at the weekend, and Kevin's rubbing his hands with glee. 11 points in front of Manchester City, 9 points in front of Arsenal and Chelsea. The title's yours to lose, Kevin, isn't it?
It's early days still, to be fair.
All right,
that's
Slot.
the pessimism kicking in from me. But look, I don't think anybody expected the consistency. I think we knew that he had a great squad to work with. We knew he was a very good coach. I thought he'd be a good fit. I said that in the summer. I thought he'd be a good fit for what Liverpool were used to doing in terms of the high press. But he has brought a more measured approach, and it's working really well.
Yeah, loads to talk about on the show, including Arsenal resurgence and what's happened to them since Ødegaard has come back into the team and how many goals they've started to score as a result of that. We'll talk about Chelsea, if they're realistic title contenders. We'll talk about Ange Postecoglou because he's had another sort of wobble about questions that he didn't quite like.
Spursy again, smash Man City and then drop points at home to Fulham. Ultimately predictable.
And we'll talk about the relegation battle as well. So much to come. So let's get started with Liverpool, Manchester City. Interestingly, there's so much talk around what happened after the game between Liverpool and Manchester City that it sort of dominated the conversation in the aftermath, and I can understand that. You spoke to Stefan Ortega. He made a really ill-advised comment about the city of Liverpool, which I thought was a bit crass and unnecessary. And Pep Guardiola has been pictured with his 6 fingers, not only in response to the "you're getting sacked in the morning" charts, but also in response to the City fans as well. He walked right up to the City fans and did the 6 fingers. What was your take on it when you first saw it?
Well, my take at the time was that it was a bit of banter, and actually Guardiola was smiling when the Liverpool fans were singing that song, "You're Getting Sacked in the Morning." Obviously then went full Mourinho with the 6 fingers. I didn't mind it because, I say, I thought it was playful. It was only when you speak to Ortega afterwards, and you're right, his comments were clumsy at best about the city of Liverpool. And then Guardiola says that he expected that kind of stick from clubs like Brighton. He actually name-checked, but he wouldn't expect it at Anfield. So clearly it got under his skin. And I just wonder why, really. I think probably that's a reflection of where City's minds are at the moment. They look frazzled out on the pitch. It's 6 defeats in 7 games without a win. They're only 1 game away from equaling Manchester United's worst winless run since Ferguson retired. If they don't beat Forest in midweek, then they'll match that. And I think Pep's got a lot of issues, and probably that frustration came out. So at first I thought it was okay. And then when you see actually he's wound up by this, you think, come on, Pep, you've got bigger worries than Liverpool fans giving you a bit of jib.
Kevin, yes, those bigger worries certainly are the case, and he's got to try and put together a response when they play Nottingham Forest on Wednesday night. Just explain to me what your view was as a Liverpool supporter when Stefan Ortega came out with those comments, because the Liverpool fan base has reacted quite badly to this.
Yeah, I think I can understand why that's the case. But, obviously in the heat of the moment after a demoralising defeat, there's a little caveat there. But I think you have got to be really careful what you say. And I think going to the Guardiola situation, I think that actually, I thought that as well. I thought it was just banter. But actually, if you look more globally, if you look at the scratches down the face after the Feyenoord game, he's clearly feeling that pressure. He is clearly feeling that this is a challenge he's not used to facing. It's one thing to renew a team time and time again, but they don't normally have this kind of dip under him. And usually when he comes up with different solutions, it works. I didn't understand that team selection for Sunday. I couldn't understand why you'd have Gundogan and Bernardo in the middle, why you'd have Rico Lewis in that wide area, why you'd have Mateus Nunes wide. Surely it'd be the other way round. I couldn't really understand what it was designed to counteract. And, when those things don't come off, that just adds to that sense of drift and that sense of frustration. So I think the whole club at the moment is clearly febrile. I think they're really feeling that pressure. And 11 points is a hell of a gap.
Yeah, it's a hell of a gap. And any other manager, any other club, you'd probably write them off right now. But you just wonder whether or not he can pull a rabbit out of the hat. You're shaking your head thinking it's impossible. It does look like that at this moment in time. Go back to the sort of intense pressure that's on Guardiola. You could sort of feel that. But I wonder, when you get to the point, and he said this, he said, look, I've signed a new 2-year contract. I'm here because it's a great place, but I'm only here if I keep winning. And of course, he said, I only earn the right to stay here if I can show that I can turn it around. When does it sort of get to the point where people are starting to question whether he can turn it around? Listen, he's the great Guardiola. Everyone's got a hell of a lot of respect for him. Let's not pretend that he's not a genius. We all accept that. But all managers have a period where they go on a dip. It's why why he at Barcelona took a sabbatical. It's why when he went to Bayern Munich, he only stayed there for 3 years. He stayed here longer than ever. And now he's in the dip of his career. How does he show that he can pull it out? And did questions start to be asked whether about he can or not?
Well, I think when he makes the type of judgment calls that he did at Anfield on Sunday, then you do have to start to question him, because you're both right that the setup of the team looked all wrong for me. It was only really when Jeremy Doku came on in the second half and started running at the Liverpool defence that City had any kind of threat at all. So you wonder why he was left on the bench in favour of Nunes, who I've been quite vocal about it. I just don't see what Pep sees in him at the top level of the game. Not many managers would go through a run of 6 defeats and a draw in 7 games and not be questioned. So I don't think he is above being questioned. I don't think they regenerated the squad enough in the summer. Maybe that was partly because they weren't sure the manager was staying. Maybe it was partly because they knew there'd be a new sporting director coming in and they wanted him next summer to lead the transfer policy. But there's a lot wrong with Manchester City. Their record at Anfield is poor, so it's not a surprise they've lost the game. I think it's the manner of the defeat, the way that Liverpool steamrolled them, particularly in that first half. You haven't seen a Guardiola team look so mortal too often over the course of his career. And I don't think it's a give me. They bounced right back against Nottingham Forest in midweek. Pep has promised they will. We're going to show you in front of our own fans, he said. I think Forest might have a little bit to say about that.
Yeah, it was fascinating. That first half an hour was absolutely crazy, wasn't it? The intensity with which Liverpool played. They pressed high up. They didn't let Manchester City get out. They couldn't get into the Liverpool half. They didn't have a shot on the Liverpool goal until the 39th minute, and even that was a little bit of a scuffer from Rico Lewis. The combinations that Liverpool were coming up with were devastating. Alexander-Arnold was superb. The way he picked out that ball for Salah was terrific, that set up the first goal. Gakpo coming in at the far post, brilliant timing of his run into the box. Van Dijk could have had a hat-trick of headers at one stage in the game because he was just such a threat from set pieces. They absolutely smother them. The one thing I will say, Kev, is that sometimes when you dominated a game so much, you sort of almost take your foot off the gas, and they kind of did that just after half-time when they should have already have been 2 or 3 or 4 to the good and weren't. And if that period after half-time just goes against them a little bit, then all of a sudden the game might have changed. But so far, when that happens to them, they're getting away with it.
Yeah, they are getting away with it. I think that's absolutely the case, by the way. I think there's been a lot of talk of how close it was to perfection. I thought it was a brilliant performance, but the big drawback really in terms of the overall performance was the lack of a clinical edge in attack, because actually Van Dijk has those chances that you mentioned. Salah's clean through, lifted over the top. They had numerous chances to put that game away, didn't do it. And against the team of City's quality, even in the situation they're in right now, even in the poor form they're in, there's always the capability of making something happen. I thought Doku was a real danger when he came on. I genuinely think if he stays fit, working with Guardiola for a bit more time, I think he's going to be a superstar. later in his career. I think he's terrific. I think he's a really dangerous player. The raw materials there. If he can get the end product, I think he's going to be terrific. And there was a spell where I thought they threatened, but Liverpool have that incredible ability now to actually drop it down a couple of gears. Arne Slot suggested that it wasn't deliberate, that it was just that City's quality on the ball gave them that spell in charge. But actually, I think there was an element of Liverpool trying to drop back a bit and catch them on the counter. And that ability to take the fire out of the game, I think, is the big difference. I think it doesn't have to be. They could do that at times under Klopp. I think they've really refined that under Slot now. Take a collective breather.
Yeah.
Keep the opposition at arm's length, and if you can hit them on the counter, do it, because they've got that pace to do it. So very impressive again in terms of game management. It's the same with Real Madrid. At times, Real were on top. That's fine. You don't panic. You keep your shape. Try and hit them on the counter.
Something that I was talking about with Conor McNamara actually in the press room afterwards, that ability to sort of take their foot off the gas for a bit and just have a collective breather and just go again then straight afterwards. I suppose we've got to really talk about what happens with Manchester City and why they're in the situation they're in. Lots of speculation, whether or not the players are actually happy that Pep signed a new 2-year deal because his methods are so intense, so demanding that actually the idea of him continuing when they thought at one point he was going to leave has sort of drained them even further. I'm not sure about that, but it's certainly theories that are being put around. And there's loads of wild speculations that maybe they know that they're going to be docked so many points that they're going to end up in League Two in 2 seasons' time. And the players have sort of realised that. And therefore you just come off the bridle 5%. Or it's the fact that they've won 6 Premier Leagues. And mentally you can't keep doing that. But there is so much debate about them, and the City fans get a little bit prickly about it. But the truth is, when you've done so much and you've made such a splash on the landscape, when it starts to go wrong, you're going to get the scrutiny as well.
Well, it's such a dramatic drop-off, isn't it? I saw one tweet earlier that Sir Alex Ferguson never put 6 fingers up to the Liverpool fans, A, because he doesn't have 13 fingers, and B, because he never lost 6 games out of 7. So it is an incredible decline for a side that have hit so many high standards. So I think we do have to dissect and try and work out the reasons. It's too simplistic, in my opinion, to say that it's just because they haven't got Rodri. I'll keep going back to the point that I don't think they've done enough in recent transfer windows to regenerate the squad. And as champions, you need to strengthen from a position of power. They've not done that. I think they've got players there like Kyle Walker and Kevin De Bruyne who maybe have gone on for one season too many. But the De Bruyne situation is fascinating, isn't it? Because he's been fit for a few weeks now, yet he still finds himself on the bench. And you pointed it out during the Sunday session. There was one point when he was warming up on the touchline, carrying his shirt as if say, come on, Gaffer, look, I've got my shirt. I'm ready to come on. So I wonder what's happening there between manager and player. And I do think maybe you've hit the nail on the head when it comes to the intensity and the demands that Pep puts on his players. Maybe that's taken its toll. And again, that comes back to the fact that actually you need to freshen up the dressing room so that you've got players coming in who are fresh to the way that Guardiola wants to work, rather than those players that have been there for so long and maybe have just got bored of the same voice.
I mentioned this on the Sunday session as well, Kevin. Have we missed the trick? Did cheeky Begiristain actually get the sack? Did he actually get moved on? Because the recruitment over the last couple of years has been so bad. Pep realises he hasn't got the tools. Did Begiristain's eye go off the boil? And is that why they've brought in a new sporting director? Because he's not retiring. He's 60 years of age. He's not retiring. He's just going back to Spain.
Yeah, I think certainly there have been some missteps. There's no doubt about that. I can't understand why you would sell a player of Julian Alvarez's quality and not even try to replace him. So I know they've had injuries. I know Oscar Bob is a player that doesn't get talked about that much. He was starting to look really good and got injured. That was actually quite a big blow, I think, because he was starting to really affect the game. Grealish has obviously been off it. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it's... But you find this a lot now. I find this with Arsenal. Arsenal's squad is very small, actually.
Really small.
It doesn't take you long to get down to some of the kids. Now, I can understand that in the sense that you want to create that pathway for young players and bring them through. But there is inherent risk in that. And if you're trying to perform at the top level in the Champions League and the Premier League all the time, and you're having to kind of drive players into the ground, I mean, Gundogan looks really, really out of it at the moment. Not the player that we know. Bernardo Silva's having to play time and time again in quite a demanding role, and they just don't have the legs for it in midfield. And The problem with that is in the modern game, it doesn't matter who you're playing. It doesn't have to be Liverpool at Anfield. It could be anyone. If you don't have that ability to snap back into shape in transition, you're in big trouble. Yeah. And they're finding this over and over again. So I agree with you. I think their recruitment has generally been very, very good, but it has slowed down. And it's the quantity that I think is a problem. That balance is not there. And it's being shown up at the moment. And also, just finally on this, with De Bruyne, he's had so many little injury problems, and you just don't know where his level's at right now. So Guardiola talked about it after the game, didn't he? Kevin got some minutes. You know, he's obviously got an idea of where he thinks he is fitness-wise, and maybe De Bruyne's got a different one.
Forest up next for Manchester City, another potential banana skin. The Premier League is so competitive now that every single game demands you to be at your very best. You cannot rest and rotate. You've got to make sure that you've got a system and a plan for every single game. Liverpool face Newcastle away from home. A tricky clash on paper, but we've said that a lot about Liverpool in recent games, and then they've jumped over all of the hurdles that have been placed in front of them up until this point. But it will be a fascinating week, that is for sure. Let's take a look at some of Sunday's action now. Manchester United and Chelsea running riot. We were sitting at Anfield, surrounded by Liverpool supporters, and he screamed, "Manchester United, we're back." Not sure that's the case, but they've beaten Everton by 4-0. Joshua Zirkzee scoring a couple of goals, 2 goals for Marcus Rashford as well. Both those two players that had been most maligned, especially when the team sheet came out, by you.
Yeah, Xerxes was a surprise appointment. It was tongue-in-cheek, by the way. We're back.
Is it?
Yeah, because Everton are horrendous, aren't they? So let's see how they get on at Arsenal in midweek. But yeah, I wasn't overly enamoured with this selection of Xerxes, but to be fair, he played in a little bit of a deeper role. He linked up the players as he was at the start of the season, and it will do his confidence the world of good. He's got 2 goals. Same for Marcus Rashford. Obviously, Ahmad was the star of the show, and I'm delighted for him because he was criminally underused by Erik ten Hag. I've interviewed him before the FA Cup final. I found him a very humble, down-to-earth guy, and I think he's probably on form, just about United's best player. So it was a perfect afternoon for Ruben Amorim, but certainly Everton, with their defensive issues and the fact they can't score for toffee, excuse the pun, played into his hands.
I shouldn't have laughed at that.
No,
I'm really ashamed that I laughed at that.
You're going to have to check yourself there. The team selection did raise my eyebrow as well, because I thought Mount and Højlund were so good on Thursday night that they deserved another chance to go again. But then in reflection, I thought about it and I thought, well, actually, he's going to save his A-team for Wednesday night against Arsenal, isn't he, Kev?
Yeah, and I think he also is trying to get a look at as many players as he can in different situations, different combinations, because he's been at pains to stress, and he's right, that he's so early in his reign, it is going to take a lot of time, and he wants to see how players handle different positions, because I think that's what's fascinating, actually, about Amorim's tactical setup, because some players will be able to play through the middle in that central striker's role, but also a little bit deeper. We've seen that with Marcus Rashford, maybe. They'll also be able to play, in Bruno Fernandes's case, in a central midfield role or in one of those two behind the striker. So he's looking at different combinations. We've seen Nusayr Mazraoui excel in that wide centre-back role, but also you could have him at the right wing-back role if you needed to. I think you're absolutely right. I thought Diallo's pressing was absolutely outstanding, and we saw that with a couple of the goals. And I do think that's the kind of position where he could thrive. He's very good at that, Amorim. He's very good at kind of really crafting those wide fullbacks and really working with them. And if they do have kind of attacking instincts, that's going to really help. We shouldn't forget that Everton were competitive for the first half hour. It wasn't a perfect performance, but I was pleased for Zirkzee as well, because he's been judged very quickly, I think. I think he's a player that has the kind of skill set that can suit what Amorim wants to do, but we know how cutthroat it is. And we know that if you don't hit the ground running straight away, people are going to say that you're not up to it, that you were a bad signing. But I think given time, he's still a very young player and he has that all-round quality to make a difference.
Interesting, isn't it? Because I think the other thing he's doing, and doing this really well, is he's keeping everybody interested. He hasn't alienated anyone. He's opened the door really to absolutely every member of the squad to give them a chance to play and to offer themselves up to grab an opportunity to be a part of the new era. So I think he's probably made a good start. And we're only 3-4 games in, and he's got a big game on Wednesday night when that wing-back role is going to be tested by Ødegaard and Saka and Trossard and Martinelli. How they're going to cope down at Arsenal?
Well, it's difficult, isn't it? Particularly when you look at United's away record for some time now. Ten Hag had a real problem winning games away from home, particularly against the juggernauts of the Premier League. But he's been there and done it before, hasn't he? I was there when Sporting knocked Arsenal out of the Europa League on penalties. That was a tactical masterclass. So he's going to have a plan up his sleeve, and I expect United to be competitive. They're missing a couple of key players in Kobbie Mainoo and Lisandro Martinez, so there's going to be a couple of enforced changes. I wonder if Luke Shaw might get his opportunity as one of those three centre-backs. Fascinated to see how he plays it. Højlund actually had a good game at Arsenal last season. We were there, gave their centre-backs a little bit of a rough ride. So does he get the nod? Again, I'm expecting changes. I'm looking forward to it. I expect United to get beat, I've got to be honest, but I expect them to be competitive.
Interesting, because I remember going there with Mourinho, I think under Ole Gunnar Solskjaer as well, where a really good defensive performance and counter-attacking performance got the better of Arsenal by Manchester United. That's the kind of thing they're going to need at the Emirates on Wednesday night. We need to touch on Everton, because you mentioned that they were good for the first half an hour, Kevin, but after that they were pretty awful. And I think the whole sort of malaise around the club is characterised by one challenge in particular. If James Tarkowski can lose a 50-50 with Amad Diallo, you are bang in trouble.
Yeah, that was, I think, symbolic of the collapse, really. And he will look at that and know that it wasn't good enough. But obviously, Amad had that pace and momentum going into the challenge and was on a high anyway and was playing really well. But it shouldn't happen. And that's the thing, I think. I think they're not scoring goals. They're not creating enough chances. And so then if you can't rely on your defensive strength and you get a collapse in games, then it's really difficult. But it's just a club in stasis at the moment. There's been so much uncertainty at the top of the club. Sean Dyche has had to play politician for quite a long time, but I think he does have to look at what he's bringing to it. Are they getting the most out of the players that they have? I don't think it's a particularly great squad. I think there are some good players in it. Brantwaite had a bit of a nightmare, but of course he's been out injured for quite a long time, so I think he has incredible potential, I think. the goalkeeper's excellent. It's a bit idiosyncratic now and again, but I think he is generally...
He's an asset.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, they do have some quality players in there, Dwight McNeil, but they're just not hitting a high enough level often enough. And if you're not creating enough chances, scoring enough goals, you then do need to be defensively solid. And been a fair few games this season where they haven't been.
Well, I can't work out whether or not the real situation is that Sean Dyche isn't doing well enough with a group of players that should be doing better, or whether he's a victim of circumstance because the whole club is rotten from the core, and actually, until the new owner comes in and tries to sort all of that out, no one else is going to be able to thrive either. But there are increasing sort of rumbles that he might not be the manager for much longer. They play Wolves on Wednesday night, then they've got the Merseyside derby on Saturday live on talkSPORT. Is he still going to be in charge?
I think he will be, but I think he knows the writing is on the wall. I described it on Sunday, didn't I, as a loveless marriage where, both parties know they're heading for divorce, but they're just staying together for the kids, as Henry Winter put it. And there is an element of that. I spoke to Sean Dyche at the Legends of Football event a few weeks ago when Wayne Rooney was honoured, and I asked him, are you excited about the prospect of leading Everton into a new stadium? And he was very downbeat. He gave me the impression from his answers and his body language that he knows he won't be the manager taking Everton into that new stadium. As soon as the Freaking group come in, I think they'll look to make a change. I think David Moyes is a genuine contender to go back for a second spell. So let's see if that happens, how that works out. But you mentioned on Sunday, they've got 13 players coming to the end of their contracts in the summer. I think that's a good thing, because I think it needs a new broom. I think there's too many players who've been there for too long and they've got stuck into this cycle of poor performances and poor results, and really only being kept in the Premier League by the fact that they keep finding 3 teams who are worse than them. And I think they will again this year, but at the moment they're a football club going nowhere.
Kev?
Just a point on the Friedkins coming in, they tend to make moves managerially that they think will please the fans. What I mean by that is if you look at their recent history with Roma, for example, Mourinho came in, was very successful initially, won the Conference League, they got to the Europa League final, but because he wasn't delivering in the league and they were nowhere near qualifying for the Champions League, they decided to make a change and they thought, right, Mourinho's still got a lot of loyalty in this Roma fan base. How do we do this? So they brought in Daniele De Rossi, absolute club legend. He did well for a while, gave him a contract. And then again, when they had a sticky start, they ditched him. And so their reputation for kind of managerial savvy in terms of bringing guys in has really taken a nosedive. And now you've got Claudio Ranieri, who again, beloved of the Roma fan base, but they've done it because they brought in Ivan Juric and he was a disaster. So my suspicion is they will want to make a change because they are the type of ownership group that's very conscious of fan sentiment, and they will want somebody who can really boost the fans. But whether they'll make the right choice remains to be seen.
Well, because David Moyes is on the list at the moment, but they're not in charge right now, are they?
No.
The Friedkin group. When do we think that's going to happen?
I think they were hoping to get it done by the end of the year. Obviously, these things take a bit of time when it comes to Premier League approving takeovers. I know I was quite close to the Bournemouth one when Bill Foley came in, and they were surprised, A, how long it took, and B, with the level of detail. I think they even wanted to see his military records from when he served in the military when he was a teenager. That's how detailed they go now, which is good, by the way, because they've let too many dodgy owners take over football clubs and it not work out. So, yeah, I think by the end of the year, but that does give Sean Dyche a stay of execution, doesn't it? Because who is actually there at this moment in time to make a decision to change the manager?
Interesting. Did we find anything out about Bill Foley's military record?
Not to my knowledge, no.
That didn't leak, did it? That would have been fun. Just to see what he got up to. I don't know. Let's move on to Chelsea against Aston Villa. Chelsea absolutely sensational, especially in the first half. I thought they went man for man all over the pitch. They pressed high up. They won the ball, turned it over, and scored some terrific goals as well, Kevin. So they're level on points with Arsenal at the top of the table, just behind Liverpool, obviously.
Just behind.
9 points is quite some distance.
Different motorway. If you're talking about cars.
They can see them. They can see them on the horizon somewhere. But those two very close. In fact, Arsenal are only top on alphabetical order. So if Arsenal are in a title race, are Chelsea?
I think they could be. The squad's massive, and that brings opportunity, but it also brings problems because it's fine now, but when you get to a little bit further into the season and players are getting more disillusioned by not playing, I think it helps he's got that Conference League because there's certain players he can give game time to in that, and that'll keep them sweet for a bit. If you didn't have that, I think there'd be more of a problem. So January, I think, needs to be sedate for them. I think they can't be going out and trying to bring players in left, right and centre because that actually would disrupt things. I think Maresca's done a really good job. And I think it's no surprise that you look at some of the coaches that are at the top of the Premier League. You've got Maresca, worked with Guardiola, Arteta, worked with Guardiola, and Guardiola himself, even though he's having a tough time. So
he has worked with himself, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So I think what that shows is the influence that he has. And I think it also shows that winning mentality, that ability to set a team up, and also that natural authority, which I think Maresca has. And he's been prepared to make big decisions. He's been prepared to sideline players if he feels it's necessary. He's starting to get a tune out of Enzo Fernandez. There's another one who I know it was massive money, so I get it, but was judged, I think, too quickly. I think, they're starting to find a role for him. So they're in a really good place right now, and they can talk it down all they want. But the amount of money they've spent, the squad they have, they should at least be competitive.
Yeah, what they need to do is get into the Champions League this season. That is the main aim for Chelsea. But anything else that goes with that, obviously, is a massive bonus. And you're right. They've spent £1 billion. So if you'd spent £1 billion, you'd expect to be challenging for top honours. That's what they've got to do. If it doesn't happen this season, it must happen next, because you can't keep talking about for the future. At the end of the day, at some point, you have to worry about the present as well. And Chelsea have got to start doing that. They hadn't done that in the first 2 years under Todd Boehly and Begdan Egbali, but maybe this season will be brighter. It was fascinating, actually. I did listen to Graham Potter give an explanation about his time at Chelsea, and one of the things that he said is that, even Tony Bloom walked into Brighton and goes back now and thinks, I made serious mistakes in the first couple of years, but it was Brighton, and at the time they weren't in the Premier League, and no one noticed, because they weren't being made on the big stage. So people will come in, think that they can do it one way, and then actually have to readjust and do it another. What about the Chelsea team? Because they've had to move some pieces around the jigsaw board, because Reece James has been injured, Malo Gusto has been injured. Caicedo could end up playing at right back, could he?
Yeah, potentially. And that would be a big loss, because I think he's been one of their key men in midfield this year. We're starting to see the Caicedo that cost them so much money and that excelled in a Brighton shirt. And they lost Fofana as well, haven't they? Maresca coming out after the game saying that his hamstring injury probably is going to keep him out for the rest of the year. And I think that's a big problem, because I commentated the game against Heidenheim for talkSPORT 2 in the week. They played a back three, but all three of their centre-backs, Disasi, Tosin and Badiashile, look very uncomfortable playing out from the back as Maresca wants them to do. So I think losing Fofana, who again is starting to look like the player they invested in at Leicester, I think that's a big blow.
Well, Chelsea won 2-0 in that game against Heidenheim, but Jorgensen had to make 11 saves. I mean, at least he's showing that he can put a bit of pressure on Robert Sanchez in goal. But are you now willing to apologise to Nicholas Jackson? Another goal?
Yeah, he took it well. Yeah, he took it well.
You were having a go at him and Scott Minto last year all year.
I'll apologise to Scott Minto. I think you gave Nicholas Jackson a bit of stick as well.
I was the vice president,
even as a Chelsea fan, to be fair. So
I'm pleased that this year he's changed his name by default from Nicholas Jackson offside to just Nicholas Jackson, which is great. But he's also scoring a lot of goals. He's a talented boy.
He's been in my fantasy team for a while now. So
is that an apology?
What an honour!
I've reaped the rewards.
It's almost like going to the Palace and getting an MBE, isn't it? I was in Crook's fantasy team.
But no, listen, he's key. His partnership with Cole Palmer is key. What a goal he scored again, by the way. And I mean, you're saying that Chelsea have got a nice run of games coming up. I think they've got a real opportunity to put points on the board and try and close that gap to Liverpool. I think they will finish in the top four, and I think they'll win the Conference League at a canter, and that'll be a very decent start to Maresca's tenure.
You never know. Kev?
I was just going to say, I think the goalkeeping issue is interesting, because I actually think Jorgensen...
He keeps it interesting, Robert Sanchez, doesn't he? That's for sure.
Well, I put Jorgensen in. I'm quite surprised he hasn't been put in so far. He had a brilliant season for Villarreal last term in La Liga. And Sanchez, to me, I know he made an important save from Watkins in the game with it at 1-0, I think it was at the time. But for me, he's so jittery. And I can't, if you're going to have that system where you are bringing it out from the back, where the goalkeeper's heavily involved, I just think he does spread a bit of anxiety. And I am surprised they've not made that change. Just on Jackson, the thing to remember about him, actually, was that he didn't have a long track record at Villarreal. He didn't play a lot of first-team games before he made that move. Yeah, exactly. So, Chelsea took him on, pretty much half a season of top-level performance. So it was a risk. It was a gamble. And
he was going to go to Bournemouth before he failed his medical.
Yeah. So there was always going to be that adjustment period. But now we're seeing a player that affects the game. That's the thing. Where he looks wild sometimes, but he always affects the game. You can never sideline him from a match.
Pochettino was pretty clear this guy is going to be very good in the future. Right from the very start, he said, give him time. He was like, and if you question that, I always remember the look on Poch's face when someone said something to him about Jackson. He was like, as if to say, you stupid. Obviously, because he'd seen him every single day in training and could realise what would happen in the future with him and couldn't understand why people who maybe didn't see him every day sort of reacted to just the sort of snapshots that they got in matches. Slowly but surely, he's definitely improved. His consistency's better, his timing's better, and his finishing's getting better. he used to miss a lot of chances as well. He's scoring a lot of chances now. So, I think he deserves a lot of credit actually for the way that he has sort of allowed all of that criticism to go over his head too, which is something that he talked about with Scott Minto when they did that brilliant interview about almost a year ago now. Aston Villa have got a big problem because this is Unai Emery's worst run as a manager. It's their worst run since he turned up, obviously. 8 games now without a win, leaking goals for fun. And by the way, if you go back over the course of the last year, their record has not been good defensively. That's been a massive issue for them. Emi Martinez was having brain fade after brain fade yesterday during the game. And they've got so bad now, they're even below Manchester United in the league.
Is that the barometer now? Is it? I'm not surprised by it. I mean, they had to wrestle with PSR in the summer. They sold Douglas Luiz.
You thought he was a genius.
Emery?
Yeah.
When did I say that?
Oh, yeah, you've been giving it the large about how much of a genius he is and how much I was out of order for questioning his methods.
When you said they hadn't really improved under
Steven Gerrard. That's not what I said. What I said was I didn't get all the hullabaloo.
Well, listen, he's proved himself to be a very good manager by getting Villa into the Champions League, and actually their European form this season has been good. But I do worry about the squad depth. I was going to mention Douglas Luiz there. Wouldn't have been a part of the plan, would it, to qualify for the European Cup for the first time since the 1980s and sell one of your key players? They had to do that because of PSR, and I think they've missed him. And I think if you look at Unai Emery's track record, he's a manager who tends to do very well in Europe, but when he is doing well in Europe, the league form can fade away a little bit, and that's what we're seeing.
He is clearly a good manager, and there's no doubt about that. And Aston Villa fans obviously love him, and with good reason, because he's given them some brilliant success. And I actually think what they did last year was really important. But what Crook said about PSR, I think, goes to the heart of the competitive of the Premier League. How can Aston Villa, having done so brilliantly last season and got themselves into the Champions League, be hamstrung by a financial system that makes them weaker? That is a fundamental flaw of the whole ecosystem. Because what you're doing is you're discouraging a team that have surprised everyone and done a very, very good job by slowly building from reaching that level, because they can't kick on from there.
Yeah, the system's badly put together. The spirit of it is correct in the sense that you are trying to cool spending. You're trying to make sure that one or two clubs can't completely dominate, because if they're state-backed or they have unlimited resource, then you don't want them to completely distort the league. So I understand that, but it's written wrong. For me, it should always have been something like a league-wide spending level or a league-wide salary cap. And if you can all get to that, fine. Villa are ambitious and they want to get to that, the same as, say, a Manchester City would, or a Newcastle would, or a Chelsea would, fine. But the problem you've got is that, PSR is slowing teams' growth, and it is hamstringing, as you say, ambitious owners who want to spend and accelerate their team's development. So,
and it's no secret, Kevin. Last year, Newcastle did brilliantly get into the Champions League, and then they fall away because they can't go on and invest in areas that they need to be able to compete at both levels. Aston Villa surprise everybody. Unai Emery does a brilliant job. They get into the top 4, get into the Champions League, and actually have done brilliantly in the Champions League, by the way.
Yeah, they really have, actually.
Can't compete as well in the Premier League because they haven't got the resources to be able to do it. And I think when just looking at those two examples, you have to say, if you wrote those PSR rules, oh, hold on a second, we need to somehow find a facility that those clubs that get into those good positions can then reinvest. They've got good owners. Both those clubs have got owners with deep pockets.
I agree.
All right? So Aston Villa have got good owners. Newcastle have got owners with deep pockets. Neither of them are allowed to spend.
Do you know the difference between those two clubs, Kev, before you come in?
Yeah.
You won't find Villa fans bashing Unai Emery for their current run of form. There are Newcastle supporters out there who suddenly are turning on Eddie Howe, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous because they've not got a centre forward who can stay fit. I think that's a big problem, by the way, when it comes to Alexander Isak leaving St James's Park, because I think it's his wish. If you're Arsenal and you're looking for a number 9, you're going to look at that injury record and think, well, maybe that's not worth the risk. But the fact there are Newcastle fans bashing Eddie Howe, I think is absolutely ridiculous.
It is time to rewrite it. It is, because the other thing, and you guys know this, we've talked about this before, incentivizing clubs for selling academy products, it's mad.
Ludicrous.
It is a mad way of approaching it.
Because actually what they'll say is, well, you never need to spend the money in the first place, so why would you get yourself into a situation where you have to send someone away on an emergency to balance the books? But the truth is that is what happens in real life. Everybody lives within their means, and then at the last minute has to somehow try and find a way to pay their bills at the end of the month. And it doesn't matter if you've got 400 billion in the bank or a tenner. You have to somehow get under that line by the time it gets to the end of the month. Next up for Chelsea, a trip to the basement side, Southampton. Could move up to second in the table if United take something from the Emirates. Villa host Brentford on Wednesday. It's a tricky fixture for them. Brentford scoring for fun, but their away form isn't very good, although Thomas Frank pointed out this week, just have a look at the fixtures that they have played. It would be nice if Aston Villa could just pull out a result just to get them back on an even keel before the Christmas period. Lots of things to round off this week, and the rest of the midweek action comes into sharp focus now. Quick word on Leicester versus West Ham United, because Ruud van Nistelrooy makes his Leicester debut at the King Power. In the dugout, he takes over a team that were woeful at the weekend. How's he going to change it around against West Ham?
Difficult. They're okay going forward, although still too reliant on Jamie Vardy. I think Buonanotte is a real talent and could be a real star under Van Nistelrooy. But you look at them defensively. They tried a back three for the first time this season. They gave up so many chances to a Brentford side, albeit very prolific at home. But I worry for Ruud. I think it's a massive job that he's taken on. I think keeping this team in the Premier League might eclipse anything he achieved as a player, because they're going to concede so many goals. I know there is a budget to sign a couple of players in January, but based on what I saw on Saturday afternoon, that they're going straight back down to the Championship.
Leicester fans were quick to turn on Steve Cooper. If Van Nistelrooy gets off to a rocky start, will they be a little bit more behind him? Will they give him more support, Kev?
It's difficult to say, isn't it? They seem to not be happy with the style of football necessarily, but his Forest connections had him behind the 8 ball from the start. I know Leicester fans will deny that and say we backed him, but I think that's always going to be in the back of people's minds. I'm really curious about this Van Nistelrooy appointment, because what's the driver behind it? Is it a handful of games as the interim boss of Manchester United?
You're not suggesting for 1 minute, Kevin, are you, that because they played Manchester United twice and got beat twice by Ruud van Nistelrooy and he looked handsome on the sidelines, that the owner decided, I like that one? You're not suggesting that, are you?
Yeah. Well, maybe. It's just a really curious one. Have they been tracking him since PSV? Maybe they have. Maybe I'm doing John Rudkin a disservice. Maybe.
Well, it wasn't Rudkin's appointment. I think that's key.
He wasn't involved in it.
It was the owner.
So Rudkin was sidelined completely in that process. I mean, that's a huge concern anyway, isn't it? I mean, that is I just defensively, I look at Leicester. Wout Vaas is a really interesting player to me, because I just think he looks so low on confidence.
Our eyes when you said that.
Leicester fans don't use the word interesting.
No, I can imagine. And I can't understand why he's not been taken out of the firing line, because he's making mistake after mistake. He's always out of position. I can't understand why you wouldn't make a change there in general. So they look awful, but West Ham, man alive, what an impression of Traffic Holmes that was at the weekend. Absolutely hopeless defensively. So you've got two teams that are really struggling to find any kind of solidity. There's bound to be 0-0, isn't it? But it should be a lot of fun, that game, because I think Lopetegui don't really see the direction of travel. I don't really see how he's improving that team.
If they could find a way to both lose, they would. Bournemouth against Spurs. This is one of those games where you're like, I don't know, I'm not 100% sure.
I'm pretty sure Bournemouth will get something, to be honest. Yeah, I think they're a good side, Bournemouth. They showed that again at the weekend. Okay, it's a unique situation where one player wins 3 penalties, another player tucks away 3 penalties. But I thought the analysis on television on Saturday night about the way that Iraola sets this team up, the way they press, the way they hunt in backs, was really interesting.
We did tell you it was going to happen right at the very beginning.
But they did this at the weekend without their best player this season in Semenyo, who's going to be back fit and it was back from suspension and presumably fully match sharp. I think they're the type of team who can run all over that Tottenham back line. So if you're asking me to pick a winner right now, I'd be putting my money on Bournemouth.
Oh, would you? Okay, all right, interesting. Because the thing about Spurs is that they can be absolutely devastating one week and not the next. And Ange Postecoglou yesterday said, why does everyone keep talking about the Manchester City victory? And why are you comparing what's happened? 7 days is a long time in football, and we've had a couple of significant blows since then. Well, the reason that people keep talking about it is because it's fresh in everyone's mind. And City once were one of the best teams in Europe. Maybe they're not at this moment, but even so, they went up there and produced a devastating display of football without their two best centre-backs, if I remember rightly. So people are going to compare the two matches because you would have expected them to roll over their opponents on Sunday if you are expecting to be a top 4 team at the end of the season, which I'm sure is their aim.
But it's almost pointless, isn't it? You go and smash Manchester City and then you drop points at home to Fulham,
he said that, right?
having been beaten by Ipswich. So I don't think he's got any right to get prickly.
So in his pre-match press conference, I'm sure he said that he wanted to back up what they'd done at Manchester City. And then when they didn't, he said, why are you comparing the two? Well, because if you don't go on and build on such a great success, then you might as well not have done it in the first place, Kev.
It feels deliberate to me. It feels
you think he's
like
just trying to wind everybody up.
Yeah, I think it's a distraction technique. I think he wants us to talk about how prickly and irascible he is and how unreasonable some of the post-match stuff is. Because what are we then not talking about? We're not talking about the players. We're not talking about their performances. We're talking about Postecoglou's reaction to it. And it does feel manufactured to me. I know the way it comes across is, oh, he's really angry, he's really annoyed. And look, you guys are on the front line of it. You have to deal with him a lot more than I do.
Yeah, it's really fun.
But yeah, I can imagine. But it do you know what I mean? It feels like the kind of thing Mourinho used to do in the sense that, right, what can I do to get people talking about anything but the 90 minutes you've just watched? And it feels like that's part of the toolbox. But I think actually it's self-defeating because in the end, it just kind of, it doesn't work for Mourinho anymore. And I don't think it's a thing that works long term. And I think it's understandable to expect inconsistency because, it is still a process. The Tottenham players, I think, are still understanding fully what he wants from them. There's risk baked into the way they play anyway. So they are going to come unstuck against teams that maybe you wouldn't think they would. And actually against the better teams, they're going to get better results because they let you play. And that's what happens with Spurs.
Can I let you into a little secret here, though? Right. And Crook, am I allowed to tell this, do you think? Am I allowed to tell this?
I don't know what you're going to say.
Yeah, when we're in the tunnel.
He's nervous now.
And we're having the discussion with Ange Postecoglou. It's different, right? So when Mourinho comes into the room, he will sit there and he'll have a chat with you and you'll have a laugh and a joke or whatever. And he might even throw a little gag in or whatever. So other managers will do that, and then the camera will go on, or the microphone will go on, and Mourinho will go stony faced.
Yeah,
give an impression. Right, he's a different character away from the microphone. Sometimes he's using it. You can tell, therefore, that he's using it as a technique. Right. With Ange, how much small talk do you have with Ange when he walks into the room?
Well, he doesn't deal in small talk, because he told me once before an interview. So yeah, I think the point you're making there is that with Mourinho, it was a deliberate act once the cameras and the microphones came on. With Postecoglou, I just think he's a grump. And actually, from what I'm told, that's also the case on the training pitch.
Apparently he's not very cuddly, touchy-feely and very friendly around the whole complex.
But pre-match and post-match is totally different.
Yeah.
Pre-match, they're falling over themselves to put out viral clips of the funniest thing he said.
Yeah, but they used to do that with Gordon Strachan. And again, there's a difference between a 30-second soundbite where you think, oh, that manager's having a laugh. And actually, if you're having to deal with that over the course of an entire press conference, it becomes a little bit tiresome.
Yeah. And there's a lot of things that he says which are, they're either sarcastic funny or they're sort of funny at the expense of someone who's sitting in the room. Do you know what I mean? It's not I don't think it's a particularly positive environment.
I'm not a huge fan.
Really? We hadn't got that impression.
No. The use of mate can be quite sharp, can't it?
Yeah. When does a word not mean what it's originally meant to suggest? Okay, Kevin, thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Enjoyed that. Alex Crook, thank you very much.
No problem.
You've enjoyed cuddling up to me on the little sofa today?
It's a little bit up close and personal, isn't it? But
He
all
loves
good.
it. He loves it. Tuesday and Wednesday night, there's live Premier League action. We're around the grounds with Adrian. He's got Dean Ashton, Leanne Sanderson, and Mickey Gray. Adrian Clark with him as well. On Wednesday night, Troy Deeney, Danny Mills, and Mickey Gray are there for all the goals that go in, including that big Arsenal-Manchester United game, the Newcastle-Liverpool game, and the City-Forest game as well. There's matches Thursday night too. We'll keep you updated on talkSPORT, and we'll preview all of the weekend's action later in the week here on the Premier League All Access podcast.